Welcome back guys, Jimmy Jules 153 with another Dreams Logic tutorial. In today's video we'll be going over how to create a color select screen for your dream so the player or players can choose their colors. You'll then be able to use this color in your other scenes and change the color of whatever you like to the color the player has chosen. I've got the color the player is choosing displayed on a coin here, but you could replace this with anything. I've just got some arrows indicating how to change the colors, and these light up when the player presses a direction. If you haven't seen the splitter tutorial yet, you might need to go back and watch this one because I use a few examples from this level, and it'll help you understand what's going on. Initially we'll go through the controller sensor outputs here and what they're doing. All this is doing is taking the outputs from the left stick and splitting them into the left-right signals. I've also got the D-pad hooked up to the same nodes, so it doesn't matter whether the player uses the D-pad or the stick, it'll work either way. I've then got the left-right outputs hooked up to nodes, which I'll take you through shortly, but basically all these ones are doing is passing through the signals. I've also hooked up the X output from the controller sensor to a transmitter, so wherever we need to know the X button has been pressed, we can just put down a receiver and not have to run a wire from the controller sensor itself. I've put a bit of a delay in too, so that the timer to the controller sensor's power port gets reset when the player selects a color, so they don't double press it by accident. The wireless receiver on the left is checking whether the title screen is done. When it's done, it outputs a signal to the AND gate, so as long as the title screen has finished and the player hasn't pressed X recently, the player can cycle between and choose their color. From the controller sensor chip on the left, we've got the left-right signals hooked up into the keyframes that have the brightness turned up on the arrows, as you can see, so when the player presses left or right, the arrows light up. I've got a bunch of nodes here just holding colors that the player can choose from. That color is then transmitted through the OR gate and then into the color of the coin sculpt. So when the player cycles through, the selector activates a different node with a different color. If we want to change the colors the player has available to them, all we need to do is change the color of the nodes here. So we'll go through the node tweak menu quickly here. All the nodes do is take in a signal and pass it through, but I've got these ones set to color and I'm using that color output. This way I don't need to have a physical object in the scene to tweak the color of, we can just use the node. The nodes also let you create ports on a microchip. I've got these ones set to no port because I don't want these ones creating a port, but you can set it to input and output and it'll create a port on the microchip that you can wire things directly to, rather than having to scope into the chip and wire it to a specific logic piece. You can see the nodes coming from the controller sensor chip have outputs, so I can just grab the left-right signal from the face of the chip. Over on the right, you can see that we've got the player 1 and player 2 global variables set up, which are storing the RGB values of the color that the player chooses. As player 1 cycles through the colors, the player 1 values change until the player presses X, then it saves the values and starts updating the player 2 variables instead. The 3 variables in a row are the RGB values, and the ones up the top are the color word variables. I've just got each color set to a number from 0.1 to 0.7, so if the color the player chooses is red, that color is 0.7. Then in the other scene, I've got some calculators saying if the color number is 0.7, display the text red. You can see this for the scores up in the corners of the screen here. When the player presses X, it starts a timer to reset the selector back to yellow, ready for player 2 to choose. It also starts a timer that turns on a keyframe to make the light on the front of the chip brighter. It also makes the animation of the flex in the background quicker and change color, to make the fact that you've selected the color a bit more obvious. We don't want both players to be able to choose the same color either, so the trash can chips stop the color from being able to be selected after it's been selected by player 1. All these 3 chips are doing is saying when X has been pressed and the player has the color currently selected from the menu, send a signal to start updating the next player's variables, and disable the color from being selected again. If the second player goes to select the same color, because the port has been activated and the color has already been selected, this AND gate will activate, which will display the text "this color has already been selected." If the player presses X while they're on the color that's been selected already, it'll play an error sound and not let you continue until you choose another one. This chip is then duplicated for each of the colors, so each one can only be selected once. When our players have selected their colors, we'll need a way to push these colors onto objects in other scenes. Here we've got a RGB getter chip for each player. If we jump into the player 1 chip here, it's the same example that we used for the splitter tutorial. In here we've got 3 variable modifiers, each getting one of the RGB values that the player has selected. This one is set to get the red variable, and we'll get that value at the very start of the level because we haven't got anything plugged into its power. And we've got the update type set to when powered on. These other 2 are doing the same thing, except for the green and the blue variables instead. We've then got these values being pushed into a combiner set to the color input, which combines our separate RGB values into a thick or a fat wire carrying all 3 signals. The color is then being pushed into the color of the node. All we would need to do to apply our player selected color to an object is just wire the node color output into the color input of the object we want to change. Just note not to wire the default output port on the node to the color of the object. You need to come into the tweak menu and use the output directly next to the color wheel. With this setup, you can place the color select screen universally at the start of any of your dreams and let the player choose the color. It's a great way to let players add a bit of customization to your dreams, even if it's something small like changing the color of an item of clothing on the character. I use this to transfer the colors of the coins in the game scene for Strike 4s and push the colors into the chips, text, robot colors, and flex around the pieces when they landed on the board. That's all for this one, guys. See you in the next one.